republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I guess before we begin, I'd like to have a minute of silence for the children, the teachers who were killed in Connecticut on Friday, and I'd also like for us to remember the first responders who risked their lives. Thank you. As an aside, I'm now in my third year on the board with Jim. Others, I know Robin goes back a few more years than us. We have former board members and a lot of the folks here in the audience who are very involved in the schools, along with our administration and staff. And I can tell you that in all my years here, Irvington, our number one priority is and continues to be the safety of our kids. I've never seen anything to the contrary. Can we do better? Of course, you can always increase your safety protocols and better them and change them to make our schools safer, and we'll continue to do that. But everybody who's watching this and hearing us should know that this is all about the kids. It's about the safety of our children, and we'll continue to make that our top priority. Can I get a motion, please, to accept the agenda?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, 5-0. Thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Harrison.
Good evening, everyone. I too would like to comment on the horrific situation that did occur on Friday. Recognize that it had a large impact on all of us, the parents, children, of course, and also all of our professional staff and staff that work in the school district. Since this incident occurred, we in the school district, I believe, had a multifaceted approach. On Friday, simultaneously, we launched a number of efforts to enhance security measures in each of our schools while being certain to meet the needs of all of our students. On the security front, we have taken multiple steps to increase safety, including altering guest procedures in certain schools, changing pickup protocols, equipping more staff with two-way radios, and also better securing our facilities. However, there are other steps that may have been taken that you need to be aware of, but these are all things that are not visible to the eye. Know that we've had great collaboration with the police department and the township administration, and we believe that our schools are a safer place today because of those efforts. We've also taken a number of other efforts to make sure we're supporting our students' needs. We provided teachers with guidance on how to address students' worries and any emotions that may come about as a result of this matter. We've provided our parent community with resources to help guide their conversations with their children and to help everyone process this unthinkable event. Beginning Friday night, we sent out some materials and reference resources for parents, and then yesterday, following up, each of our principals did a fine job in also communicating with the parent community and as well as their teachers. As with the other critical situations that we faced in what has been a busy year here in Irvington, I always want to extend my gratitude to Mayor Smith, who was on the phone with us right from the bat asking how he can assist, Larry Schopfer, the village administrator, and of course the police department and the chief, who have been great partners in this process. We are assessing all of our emergency protocols and plans moving forward. We have debriefing sessions set up for this week, and we will begin a review process that will engage security experts and educators to make sure that our plan is as thorough as possible, and that work certainly will bear some recommendations that we will seek to implement as quickly as we possibly can. On a brighter note, we're in the midst of our winter concert series, which was kicked off a couple weeks ago with the high school, middle school band performance and followed up by the choral ensembles last week. And I have to tell you, our kids are amazing. It's so impressive to see their talents, which are led by obviously wonderful staff members. So if you've missed any of the other concerts or you want to take on another one, I certainly encourage you to attend tomorrow night's orchestra performance, which is at 7:30 in the theater, or to witness Main Street School's winter concert, which is on January 16th. Just as we have many talented student musicians, we have many talented student athletes, and our winter sports season is well underway, and our teams are off to a great start. And I would certainly encourage you to check out our website to find a time and something that may interest you to come out and support our student Bulldogs. We've had 2 attempts so far to schedule a coffee and conversation event with the superintendent and community, so graciously organized by the PTSA, but unfortunately inclement weather has interfered with those plans on 2 occasions. We have rescheduled, I think the third go-around, best be the charm, on the January 10th down at the Public Library, 7:30 p.m.
It's actually going to have to be in this room.
We're booked. Okay, very good. So we will be here, so familiar territory. So let's hope for clear skies and a nice audience so we can engage in some good dialogue. Also on January 17th, the Diversity Foundation will host a screening of the film Bully here in the campus theater. This free event will begin at 6:45. And it will also feature the airing of It Gets Better, which is a production of high school students. I want to be certainly clear to remind folks that the target audience is middle school and high school age children. The film is rated PG-13 and really addresses some difficult content. We would love to see parents and children come together as we continue the conversation in our community on this important topic. And students, there's a little bit of motivation for them to attend, as any students from Irvington schools that show up will get free pizza that night. And then finally, no, it won't be the last time that I speak tonight, but I want to take the opportunity to certainly wish everyone a wonderful, healthy holiday season and a very, very happy New Year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Moving right along, we'd like to get a report from the Buildings and Grounds Committee. Who would like to?
Well, if you'd like to.
I did the last one.
All right.
Hearing consensus?
Yes. We met November 27th, and Dr. Harrison and Maria Cashin, myself, Gary Knowles, and Ben Miller were in attendance. We talked about 4 particular items. One was the projects under review by our architectural firm, Land Associates. We're trying to prioritize relative to importance and budget considerations what we want to focus on getting accomplished this year. And so we kind of felt that the safety issues of the school were more important than cosmetic issues. And of course, on a safety component, that's also just keeping the buildings warm in the winter. So we're going to be replacing some pumps for the heaters, the furnaces in Dow's Lane. We're going to be fixing a retaining wall on Main Street at Main Street School. The boilers in Dow's Lane need certain controls to be upgraded, so again, Dow's Lane stays warm. We have a litany of other items that are important, and each one of them seemed to circle back to, we were wondering how the space utilization report was going to dovetail with each of one of those items. So we decided to table any particular prioritization of anything other than the few items that we talked about until we get the space utilization report, which is coming soon. And then I assume right after that we'll be able to define better how we want to finish off this year's maintenance budget. We talked about the traffic calming study. I don't understand why it's called calming, but it's just.
That's what they call it.
Yeah, all right, and that's in essence trying to make safe the road out in front of the high school and middle school relative to cars coming up and going down the hill. So after the site committee in the high school got together with if I'm not mistaken, we did get some information from Land Associates on this. We're going to be installing, or they recommend we install speed bumps in two particular places on this, I don't know what the name of this road is. High School Drive, okay? As well as we're considering, the architect is recommending that we install something called rumble strips, which is cutting into the road that is similar to that of a toll booth coming in on the thruway, where you hear the sounds underneath the car and consider something. We also wanted to engage in a way as a partner, so to speak, the village and the police department to try to reinforce with the students and the parents who are driving on this road sometimes too fast that we have to deal with this issue and we can't allow it to continue. We've made some great strides with the stop sign issue. We had some parents get involved and it looks to be rather successful, so we think it'll be fine. It should be done maybe in the spring. We can't do it in the winter because it's an asphalt-driven discussion. And, we had a family, a homeowner near Dow's Lane offer up to donate some planters to beautify Dow's Lane area, which we're working on. And then we had an update on East Field that we were, well, as a matter of fact, we were just told that we're going to have more tests done on the morning of our meeting, and we haven't gotten the results of those tests finalized. And that is the end of that committee report.
Was this meeting before or after the board meeting? We talked about the traffic
It
comments.
was before, but just a little point to clarify, the speed humps, we did discuss if we were going to go down that route, to table it until we figured out what we were doing with Bizarre's Field, because we did do construction that would kind of defeat the purpose, and we would have to do it again.
Which, I guess, consistent with what we talked about the board meeting.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you, Jim. Just moving on, before I ask for a motion on the consent agenda, is there anything that anybody wants to pull out for discussion before we deal with it as a lot? No one? No? So can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda in total?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. 5-0. That takes us up to section 10.1. Dr. Harrison is going to give us the initial 2013-2014 budget discussion presentation.
No, you put it in PDF. It's not going to change, though.
Was that?
I won't be able to change it.
No, I know, that's why I'm pulling the others.
I'm not going to be going at this alone because we all know that we have a financial guru in district that will be able to speak to the numbers more eloquently than I. But as we recognize going into any budget season, there's always challenges. There's always difficult decisions that we have to make. And certainly here in Irvington, we began to make those decisions last year. And while I was not in district, I did watch from afar and witness a lot of the conversations that were occurring and see the challenges that were before us. And at that time, there was a lot of speculation and conjecture that we were going to be in a similar position, if not a more challenging position this year and maybe in future years. But we go into this process optimistic. We go into this process establishing a clear set of goals. And we do this through two lenses in my mind. First and foremost, looking at our commitment to students, trying to acknowledge that we have to look to maintain the programs that are not only necessary, but those that are of value, those that make the difference in the educational system here in Irvington. But we also want to continually expand learning experiences. We want to try to find new opportunities to engage and excite our children about new opportunities, potentials that may be there, help them discover something maybe they haven't seen or wouldn't have seen if we did not offer it in the schools. We recognize that we have to invest in our staff, because to achieve those other goals that I mentioned, we have to make sure our teachers are well equipped, prepared, and well resourced to be able to deliver those programs effectively. But then finally, we have to protect your investment. And in protecting your investment, we can think of this facility, we can think of all the facilities, we can think of your property values, and think of all that you support with your tax dollars, your time, and your commitment in our schools. So in doing that, we have to come through a balanced approach. We have to be fiscally responsible. We have to be mindful of the constraints that are before everybody in these difficult fiscal times, being mindful of the high property taxes that everyone here in Irvington pays. But we have to remain focused on that target. We have to think about our students and what we want for them today and what we want for the future. And in doing so, we keep thinking about what we're doing for our children. We think about how we can preserve these programs that are so important. We have to think about how can we let programs grow. That's not just introducing the new programs that I referenced before, but it's how do we take a program to the next level? How do we buy more resources? How do we allow teachers to take their instruction to a new tier, to a new level, to enrich experiences for children? We have to look at our staff. We need to continually build their capacity to reach those other goals. You've heard many Dr. Kaur references throughout the year. There's a tremendous focus in this district now on bettering our teachers' ability to be successful in the classroom. And that is giving them training. That's giving them time to collaborate, to work with student work products, to develop curricula, and to, of course, develop their own skill set. We have to look at technology. Clearly, we have to find ways to bring new technologies into our classrooms. We have to give students opportunities to interact with technologies that they'll be able to use in their future experiences, whether it's college, professional, or personal. And then finally, we certainly have to maintain our facilities. For the most part, our facilities are in quite fine shape. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. We have to keep them up to snuff, up to code, but at the same time, we want to continue to make sure that they are a tool to support learning rather than a place where learning just occurs. So with that said, we look at what our financial responsibilities, we put on that fiscal leadership hat that all the administrators and the board share, and we have to think, well, how are we going to try to contain costs in this difficult environment? We have to find opportunities to seek efficiencies and think about how we can achieve these goals. We have to continue to identify opportunities for shared services. We're taking a bit of a different approach in some of our budget work this year. You're going to see some of projections, and these are very clear estimates that Ms. Miller is going to communicate. Where the numbers you're going to see tonight, I would refer to as a maintenance budget, and that is saying that we are looking to what would it cost us tomorrow to maintain the programs and services we have in place today. So, but behind that, you have to understand the budget process. We started back a month and a half ago with all our department heads, building principals, and beginning to identify what their needs are. And not a matter of just looking at a school that had an allocation of $100,000 last year, and we say, you get $100,000 next year. We have 2% increase, you get $102,000 next year. There is a zero-based budgeting process that we put in place, that each and every line that we have control over, there is a stack of materials to support every single one of those requests. So when we sit down and we move forward in this process and we begin to make those difficult decisions and we decide we have to cut back in certain areas, we can literally sit down, flip open a binder, go to the computer, pop open a file, and say, these are every one of the expenditures, these are the vendors, this is the program that needs it, this is how much it costs, and this is where it falls on our priority list. So we can make wise, prompt, informed decisions, and we know that we're accounting for every penny that you're so graciously giving us to educate your children. So to begin to understand where we are, to understand the constraints or limitations that we have this year, we've developed this maintenance budget. And again, as I said, these are estimates. And this is looking at what we have today and what it may cost for us to move forward. So with that said, Beverly is going to walk you through a series of slides to help communicate where we are and what we may need to do to stay there.
Okay. We're going to start with the revenue side of the budget. About 90% of the budget is attributed to tax levy. So therefore, we only have about 10% of our budget that we calculate. So based on a maintenance budget, the variance to my fluid calculations would only be $8,986 more. That includes, I lowered the interest that I think we're going to earn because we don't have as much fund balance and the rates are down. I plugged in a 1% increase in state aid, and I'm optimistic over that. And then the other revenues would be about $5,000. This year, I used $422,000 of fund balance as appropriated as the first line of the budget. Previous year, this district had used $285,000. I'm being very conservative and using $400,000 because I don't think we can still support $422,000. With that being said, we would need a levy to balance the budget of $47,000 if we were using a maintenance budget.
47 million.
I'm sorry, 47 million, yeah. Right. Okay, so for the budget, the expense side, it looks right now on a maintenance budget, it would be a 3.4% increase. The factors that I included, and you have to remember, all of these figures are extremely fluid because we have not calculated any of the enrollment projections, staffing levels. We haven't presented any of the budget pieces yet. So this is using our current staffing levels, and we know what the contract salaries are because the contracts are settled. That variance would be $710,000 added to the budget. Employees' retirement pension, the final figures have not been determined, but they have given us a projection. That would add another $276,000 to budget. Teachers' retirement system, again, they have given us a projection within about 0.5%, so that's adding another $935,000 to the budget for next year. Actual debt service, and that is easy to discern because they are multi-year. That will show a decrease because we have the final payment of $550,000 coming off. And health insurance, again, we don't have the final figures, but we project an 8% increase. Again, that's an estimate that has been given to us. All the other codes, which would be utilities, insurances, other expense, supplies, would add about $24,000. So that brings it to $1.7 million additional expense if we were to bring everything forward. So,
Yeah, well, Ms. Miller just sat back and threw out a big number. We talk about a variance, and again, a projection, approximately $1.7 million. And you gotta think, how do we get there? We recognize that employees get raises, but the raises are relatively consistent and in line with the cap. But she talked about a couple other figures that are well beyond our control, numbers that are being handed to us by outside groups. So if we look at the combined, the two different pension funds that we must contribute to, we have an obligation, an increase of $1.2 million. We look at the health insurance increase, and we're members of a large consortium. We believe our rates are relatively competitive, but we're looking at what some may say is a modest increase based upon some that I've seen in other places. But we're looking at an increase of over $350,000 just to maintain our current levels of health care coverage. Now, tax certs introduces something that is really a wild card for us. We could head in one budget year to the next, and we could have a large obligation going into one year, and the following year not be served with any claims in this area. But right now, we've been working closely with our council to try to get a grip on it, to begin to understand what our exposure is. And right now, when we look from today, moving forward through the next school year, we have liabilities that exceed, potentially may exceed $3 million. So very clearly, we can't step back and think, wow, we're going to have to cut another $3 million from the budget. And think, let's just think, that'd be 30 plus teachers. We go back and think pension contributions, that could be the athletics and music programs. Health insurance could be guidance services. We could very easily put programs and people with this, but we recognize there's challenges here, and we know that we cannot potentially afford to pay out $3 million in one fell swoop. So we have to look at a strategy to finance some of these obligations, and in doing so, we've arrived at an estimate, a figure of approximately $700,000 a year for the next few years to be able to carry that obligation that we may foresee. That number could come in a little higher, that number could come a little bit lower. We look at transportation expenditures here that are beyond our control. We're looking at special education services where we're taking students of quite a distance. We look at our obligations where we're transporting students that reside in Irvington to private schools outside of our community. And then looking at special education services, this is looking at new services that are coming on board per IEP requirements, and we certainly recognize it's our obligation, and we want to provide every ounce of these services for our students, but it's another obligation that's coming up that's beyond where we are today. So then we have to consider, when we look at these numbers, that throughout the number of, looking generally speaking, $1.7 million over where we are, considering our cap, considering the growth that's allowed in that cap, and we can see the conversations that we may have to start to look at here. So when we go through and look, this kind of spells out where we are. And looking at the scope of the budget, and Ben, you want to walk through the specifics here?
So, as you know, and I walked you through this last year, there's a formula for the tax cap. It's not just a straight 2% as people used to think. Some of the figures are not in yet, so I've done a projection. I have used the maximum allowable growth of 2% because I think the CPI is going to come in at that. So that would add another $860,000 to our allowable estimated tax cap from this current year. Also, too, is on the formula, they allow you to increase the tax cap if the retirement pensions are over 2%. So I've added $439 for that. Then, this is a little bit of bad news, but when you have debt service that's related to capital fund, when it's paid off, that reduces the amount of your tax cap. So that is a reduction. With all that being said, in the previous slide I showed you we needed $47,000 plus, I did it again, $47 million plus tax levy in order to balance the budget. With the tax cap, we're over the tax cap by $979,000. The additional funds that we are planning to add to the budget for tax search is about $700,000, and that's, as Dr. Harrison stated, about $3 million. It could be a little bit more than that, and those are not wild figures, those are probable figures, settlements. They are all on the court dockets as we speak. So we're hoping to do bond anticipation notes over 5 years and pay them off gradually. So we're putting in $700,000. That leaves you with an estimated budget overage of $1.6 million that is over the 2% tax cap or whatever the tax cap formula may be at that time that we have to address.
So the capital has some allowances for us, right? It has some flexibility. As Beverly indicated, there's a formula associated with this. It's not a flat 2%. It gives us some allowances. So when we consider that previous slide where we were identifying the growth in areas that was just exorbitant, when we look at pension costs, well, from some standpoint, there's flexibility in addressing that. But when we look at the tax cert world, it's so uncertain. We're not sure where to come. We recognize the fairness and equity aspect of that world around tax certs, but we never know where it's going to come from. Unfortunately, there is a very strong business out there where we have folks that are soliciting property owners, those especially that have large corporate complexes, office buildings, right? Not as much residential, but commercial properties. So there is a market, an industry out there where folks are out there trying to find clientele to be able to go through this process, and in turn has its negative impact on the school district.
Also, too, the tax cap makes no allowance whatsoever for tax certs.
So as we move forward in this process, there's a lot of conversations to start to have. We recognize there's many programs that we're required to provide, whether it's under law, Common Core programs, special ed programs, other support services, transportation to bring students to school. But I just want to throw out a list of things that are going to be conversation points, things that are going to be difficult for us to process. I'm not suggesting by any means that Bev, me, the board, administration, thinks any of these things should be reduced. As I said earlier on, we think we need to grow programs. We need to find new opportunities for children. But just a sampling of those things that sit outside of the required programming. We think of our athletics programs, music, arts, vocal music. We think of clubs and intramurals. We think of professional development for teachers. We think of all other extracurriculars. We think of guidance services. We think of our facility maintenance and improvements. Of course, the advancement and maintenance of our technology. Think about world languages, a very painful conversation that we had here in Irvington last year. And then we have to think about transportation. We know we have to bring children to and from school, but our transportation policies are more generous than what the state requires. Do we have conversations about extending that transportation radius, meaning fewer kids would be eligible for transportation? The conversation that was had last year about the necessity of bus monitors. All of those things have very heavy price tags, but recognize there's values associated with it. And one thing that we put out there just really to demonstrate what we've seen other districts do across our region in looking at changing how kindergarten services are delivered. We have a quality program, but at the same time, when we step back, there's other schools that are delivering it in cheaper ways, but with lesser experiences for the children, whether that be half-day programs or other modified structures. But not something we want to do, but these are conversations, painful conversations, considerations that we have to have. So we think about what our next steps will be, and be mindful, as we said multiple times, those were estimates. I felt it to be very important, rather than to start going through the budget line by line, start going through the budget category by category. I thought it was important that we start to have our budget conversations. We start to do it within the context of what our constraints may look like, so we can start to understand all the variety of conversations we're going to have over the next 3 months in this very room. So we're going to move forward. We're going to have that normal breakdown of the budget, component by component, as you're used to. We're going to have to, as I said earlier, reconsider how we deliver some services. We're going to have to seek new efficiencies. We're going to have to look at energy conservation. Let's make some investments today that are going to save us money, maybe today, but definitely tomorrow. Let's look to identify some new shared services. And through this process, we need your engagement. We need your ideas, because certainly we can't do this all alone. So as we look to these next steps, and there's a variety of meetings here, and this is just the general outline in this forum. There's going to be other forums that we're going to add as we begin to progress through the budget process. But when we look to our next board meeting on January 8th, you can see we're going to have a presentation that's going to review a number of different areas as far as debt service, business office, insurance, athletics, buildings and grounds, transportation. And you can see as we move through the next month and a half, how we tackle those individual areas of the budget, have conversations about what our priorities are, help you understand what our constraints, what our needs are in each of those areas. And then we're going to have the difficult lifting to do. We're going to have to make challenging decisions. But we are motivated to do the right thing by our children and to do the right thing by all of our taxpayers. We're going to try to contain costs where we possibly can, but at the same time, we know we need to certainly support your investment to make sure that you're getting your money's worth in our schools.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Bev, very much. I have a bunch of thoughts, but we've started to yield to the end of the days. And Mrs. Cashman first, would you like to lead us off? Would you like an aspirin?
Or two.
Or two?
I have no comments right now.
Mrs. Carter?
I mean, Chris touched base on it, but certainly one of the board goals was better communication with the public. So, we haven't kind of formalized what we're going to do, but we're really hoping to find ways to reach out to people in venues, maybe some we've done before, some that are new for budget, where people feel like they can comfortably come and speak and have their voice heard. So I think that's certainly a priority for the board this year, to enhance the budget process and enhance the communications, because that's such a big piece.
Yeah.
Work cut out for us, what can I say?
Mr. McCann?
I echo Mrs. Kerner's comments. I think that when we go down this process, we are representatives of the community who's paying the bill here. And the best thing that we can do is reach out to the community and let them know what we're dealing with and invite them to participate and help us make these decisions. This isn't decided by 5 people. This is decided by how many families are in the district. And I would love it if we had a higher level of engagement with the community. No one decision is going to make this happen, and I couldn't be happier that Robin wants to, go down that road. I think we all do when it comes to
Mr. Whitney?
Well, it appears from this presentation that we're at a bit of a crossroads, that the tax cap started off as being abstract. Last year, it was very difficult for us to stay under 2%, but we did. And now numbers are not adding up as easily as they did last year. It wasn't even easy because we had to eliminate 11 positions last year. And so I think it's right what Jim and Robin said, that we need the community to participate and to provide the level of engagement that this problem warrants. Because we can sit here and say, we can't make these numbers add up, but we need people to offer their opinion about whether that works for them. I look at these numbers and I am currently challenged because I can't see how we can possibly cut $1.7 million in costs when in years past, when we had the budget task force, we never got to a number that was close to that was a sensible number. So I think this is a real crossroads budget for us. And I think, moreover, we need to give the administration some guidance pretty quickly on this, because they could waste an enormous amount of time chasing rabbits down a hat that really don't exist. And I think we need to make some decisions really in January about how serious we are about trying to cut $1.7 million. I just don't see how we're going to be able to do that.
Just to kind of spell out what you're saying is, there are options, and if we want to stay under the tax cap, the option is to cut $1.7 million from where we stand today. And obviously the other option is to decide as a community, do we want to stay under the tax cap, or is it too difficult? Do we want to go slightly over and give ourselves a little bit more room than the 1.7 million? So I think that's basically, those are the options right now that are out there.
And this is going to sound like we planned this, because it's a great segue to what I wanted to discuss. And I do wish I know we reached out through obviously the district website, through our Facebook page, asking for people to come here and hear this and see this, and it's the same faces we always see, with the exception of one. But, you know, I think for those of all of us who have been living this in Irvington in the past few years and going through these budgets, we have to look at recent history. And because we didn't just get here by accident. Over the last couple of years, we've had the lowest increases in property taxes throughout Westchester. And we took great pains to get to that point. We cut a lot of things that various constituencies did not want us to cut. The board made difficult decisions. The administration made difficult recommendations. And ultimately, some of them worked out pretty well. I thought we made great decisions, and frankly, some of them didn't work out all that well, and we're dealing with the repercussions. You know, now we're at a very critical juncture. Could you go back to that slide to reduce or not reduce, would you mind? You know, too many years, we as a board and have been trying to solve our budget for a specific number. And I think, and I take blame as well as everybody on the board, we're all doing our best, but because of the economy that we were living in, we weren't looking at, well, what do we want our schools to be over the next 10 years? What is it about Irvington that makes new residents over the past year and a half move here for our schools? I've talked to so many people who have come here in the last year and a half as the market's gotten better, and they're all here for the schools. So what do we want our schools to look like over the next 10 years? And this is what we're talking about, this slide right here. I mean, I believe that this is what makes Irvington schools. The rest of it's state mandated stuff. This is what makes us special, and this is what makes people want to move here. You know, I know Robin and Jim will remember, I said 2 years ago when we were considering the effect of the 2% tax cap, that we needed to be very careful because everybody wanted to cut the budget. I wanted to cut the budget. I didn't want my taxes to go up either. But what we were doing is unnecessarily and unnaturally deflating on a budget basis before the 2% tax cap came into effect, such that we were starting with a lower number from which the 2% would apply. And I said at the time, and I feel like we've come full circle because I knew that within not too much time, we were going to be put in this vice. And I think we're here now. With the 2% tax cap and the unfunded mandates are squeezing us. We're no different than most districts, but they're squeezing us. So my feeling is, and I don't know how we're all going to come out, my feeling is that we need to readjust our budget basis to a level that is both responsible to the taxpayer, but also maintain what Irvington schools are. I mean, I am not inclined at this point after, and I'm sure Chris and Bev are going to find efficiencies. We're going to find savings. I know they will. They're wonderful. Bev is wonderful. She's shown us that. But I do not believe the community wants to get rid of world languages. I do not believe the community wants to get rid of sports. I do not believe the community wants to get rid of in-district busing. I don't think that the community wants to get rid of clubs and intramurals. I don't believe that. Sorry for the rambling speech, folks, but this was more than one or two thoughts.
No, I was looking at this and I did some quick numbers in my head, and away from the state mandates, which we can't touch, okay? We'd have to take $1.7 million out of these budgets, which would mean if we do it evenly, my guess is you'd have to cut each one of those by 7 or 8% if you treated everyone evenly. I'm just off the back of an envelope, all right?
That's right.
That's realistically not acceptable to me. I don't have the answer on what we are going to do. I would like to put a lot of pressure on Bev Miller to find all the students because she finds them so wonderfully. But I think one of the things that we're going to have to do with our community is engage them with, do we want to really cut down and stay within this discussion of a 2% number? It's a nebulous number made by bureaucrats in Albany. Or do we want to maintain what we like in our schools? The village has the same discussions about all their things, all their services, and everyone loves the services that the village offers the homeowners. This is just another compliment, and I don't know how we can cut 8% out of each one of those budgets for a fictional number. I think that is really gonna be where we're gonna be. I would love to, go ahead.
No, and I think just to your point, and please invite your friends and bring people to these meetings. We did get people showing up last year. Bev did an amazing job, and I don't know what date it is, but we should really, maybe we should serve cheese and crackers. I don't know what we need, but going line by line, and it was a long meeting. It was information overload, but nobody coming out of that meeting after they took the slides home could say that they did not understand where we were spending money, because Bev took the macro budget line items, broke it down all the way into the micro, so that we knew, everybody knew, here's what we're spending money on. And if you're going to cut, tell us where you think it should cut, because now it's not just, well, we gotta be more efficient, we gotta, no, here's the numbers, where should we cut? And I think that's why last year, the budget vote was as successful for the community as it's been since I've been around, because people, I felt, really understood where we're coming from on the budget. There was no hocus pocus, the numbers were clear. So that goes to your point, yeah, absolutely.
I would like, one thing I would like maybe your office to take a little time and look into is our debt service. I believe that this year we're rolling off with $500,000 of costs, so to speak. It might accelerate in the years into the future, which would make it a little more acceptable going forward. I also would love to bring in our financial advisor to do an analysis on our debt service that we might be able to refinance our debt service. We're probably paying 4 or 5% interest on how many tens of millions of dollars. The market's now probably 2 or 3%. And that is a huge amount of savings that could come out of thin air, all right, and make our job just a little easier. And a financial advisor will come in and make a recommendation without any cost. So that might be something, you don't have to do that work, the advisor would do it all and be able to show if we can or can't save a huge amount of money.
Thank you, everybody. I guess moving on, and we'll have some time right after the next presentation for community comment, of course. Dr. Kaur, I believe you're going to lead us in the student performance review.
Okay, so some of you might remember, we actually sat here and did a similar presentation in May. Last year, our calendar was a little bit different, and around this time of year, the principals and I did a presentation on what we called opportunities and achievement, and we talked about the different opportunities that we provide for kids and the different ways that we measure achievement. In May, we provided what's really called the school report card. Over the years, the state has actually given us our data earlier, and really the school report card can be a fall presentation. So what you're going to see tonight is the data that we have from the student assessment for the 11-12 school year. So I don't want you to panic. I know it says 57 slides, but we're going to go through some of them rather quickly. It's just there's some comparison data that we thought would be helpful as you look and examine this data. So I'd just like to remind everybody why we look at our data, and we look at lots of forms of data. Again, this is only the data from the state assessments, and when I say that, I'm referring to the 3-8 ELA and math. There's also social studies and science. You'll see and the high school regions. So we look at data for a variety of reasons, and one is that we want to compare and we want to look over time at how do we measure and how does the state measure student achievement. You'll hear me talk about a few different things tonight. One of the things I always feel is important to share, though, is that New York State is somewhat fickle in their approach to state assessment. And they have, over the years, changed the assessments from year to year, and therefore it's been very hard to measure a student's achievement over time. So when you look tonight, I'm going to point out the similarities and I'm going to point out the differences. I'm also going to just guide you to consider that we are moving into a new phase of assessment called the PARC assessment. So not this year, but next year, we will have a whole new system for assessment. Looking at the state data does provide us with the multi-year performance, so we can look at trends over time. It does inform our thinking around professional development as well as curriculum development. We look at the data in a couple of different ways, and tonight we're going to share some comparison data. We generally use 12 other districts that are similar, and when I say similar, they're similar in size for the most part, and they're the districts, some of which that the state uses as comparison as well. We're going to start with the high school, and again, this was a chart, you've seen it last year. All I did for this year was add that bottom row, which is for 2012, our students, our graduates, and our Regents diploma. A reminder that in Irvington, we give the 5 mandated regions. So we give English, integrated algebra, global history, U.S. history, and living environment. As you see, I'm going to include in this presentation some older math data. So again, the state changes assessments at certain points. For a while, you might be familiar with the terms Math A and Math B. That no longer is designed that way. It's now integrated algebra. So I'll point that data out as we go so that you can see the difference. I think we're always proud of our National Merit finalists, and as you can see, for 2013, we have 2 semifinalists, and the finalist data we don't have yet. AP courses. So again, we added this column, the 2012 column. So last year we offered 19 courses. We had 555 students taking the AP exam. Again, that's not necessarily 555 different students. The 380 went for passing. Our overall enrollment was 608. This slide just gives you some comparison data for our SAT scores, and at the bottom you can see the national averages, and as we would expect, our scores are generally higher than the national averages. For last year, 22 out of 27 varsity teams were recognized as New York State Scholar athletes. I think as a district, we refer to our athletics and our programs, and I think one of the things that we're always very proud of is that while we value our academics, we also do value those extracurricular programs and athletics, and we see how they can come together to demonstrate success for our district. So this is the student performance review from New York State. I'm going to start with mathematics. These are the cohort of comparison schools that we use. I will say the one district that we have in there that is not really a comparison school for us is Scarsdale, and we include it in here just because people always seem to ask what Scarsdale is.
And you do it because their budget is so huge, no?
It's size. Mostly it's the size of the district that we use. So most of the districts that you're seeing up there are similar in size, and Scarsdale is not similar in size to Irvington.
It's a $150 million budget, right?
I wasn't even thinking, but I was thinking kids.
4,000 students.
So last year, you'll see we took out the 2007 school year and we added the 2012 school year. What you can see is across grades 3 through 8 in 2012 in mathematics, our numbers, our numbers are fairly consistent from year to year. The variation generally comes from, sometimes it's the design of the test, sometimes it's how many questions they ask in a particular area, sometimes it's the length of the test. Some of you might remember, last year was a very challenging year for us from an assessment point of view. They changed the length of the test, the number of hours students were tested, the number of days, and we also gave some field tests as if our state assessments weren't enough. So last year was very challenging for us, and I think you would see that across the board, our numbers are still within a range. And you'll see that comparatively speaking, as I had said. So this is the third grade mathematics, and this is that cohort that we compare to. I think it's, obviously the Irvington is in yellow, but what's really important is not to look so much where we land in this list, but to look at some of the numbers. So what can change significantly, can change our numbers significantly is number of kids tested. So that's an important column to look at. Also the mean. And what you really notice from any one of these given columns and from any one of these given school districts, throughout the years we bump up and bump down. We're above, we're below, we're above, we're below. But none of the numbers are really ever that different.
What do those level 1, 2, 3, 4 mean?
So students score at a level 1, a level 2, a level 3, or a level 4. So a level 2, actually, several years ago meant that you were not meeting state standard. When they made the test a little bit more difficult, they changed the, They changed the definition. So when you see that dark line across the chart, that was the year that the state changed the definition of level 2. And they now call level 2 meeting basic standards. So really, according to New York State, only level 1 is not meeting the standard. Now, as a district, we treat level 1 and level 2 as recognized as a way to recognize students to provide academic intervention.
Isn't it really meeting some basic skills? It doesn't say, right? Because it doesn't say that you're meeting all the basic skills.
Meets basic requirements. It meets basic standard. So, and again, it's not a standard that we use. We provide support for students who score a 2. So that was our third grade. In the fourth grade, comparatively speaking, again, look at the numbers and again, notice that mean and across.
How are they, do you know how they're calculating the mean? Well, as in, what does it mean? That's
What does the mean mean?
I'm not sure what you mean when you say how are they calculating the mean though.
the mean of what?
It's the average score.
The average score
Right.
for that particular cohort of, in this case, fourth grade students in Irvington that took the mathematics assessment in the spring.
As compared to all the others?
In this case.
No. Just the average score, the average
It's just-
scale.
Right,
it-
I'm
it's-
saying, but here, it's only, right, it's across our district, and then what you're seeing here is the comparison from one district to another. Fifth grade. And I always, you know, when I look at our data, I always think it's important to recognize that from one year to the next, sometimes it's cohort driven, and while sometimes it's nice to be closer to the top, because the number differential is so small from one grade to another, and because our test numbers are so small, I think I'm just cautious that where we fall in this list is not always so significant. This is the sixth grade.
What do you consider significant in terms of the level 3, 4? Is 5 points difference? Or you're saying, I mean, at some level there's a significance.
I think, I'll give you an example of what can happen. And this is one of my favorites. So a few years back in fourth grade, they had a long essay question on computer studies. Fourth grade was a huge social studies unit, and they talked about computer studies. And with this whole essential question was computer studies and good government. Well, all of a sudden that shows up on an assessment. Wow. Well, we would expect our kids to do really well on something like that. So sometimes it's prior knowledge. At some point, when I maybe speak to the board a little bit about Common Core, and I can explain some of the changes that's happening with Common Core, one of the major changes is changing to more authentic texts, where they're going to be using the kind of reading a student might actually read in that grade level. Whereas right now, the texts that they use are random or generated for the assessment. And so that creates a variability depending on the school, depending on the grade, depending on the curriculum that the school's using.
Does that variability exist in mathematics, which would seem to be inherently more empirical?
I would say it doesn't exist to the same degree as it does in ELA. ELA is way more complex, but I will say that it depends on the math program you use and the approach that you see. Our mathematics, we've been pretty consistent. I'm going to show you a couple of more slides around math. It's been pretty consistent in math.
Just one generality that popped out to me, and, kind of looking in third, fourth, through whatever. It looks like we're all pretty consistent and pretty close. However, for some reason, the thing that jumps out is if you go back to the third grade, the top couple schools really have a large percentage of kids in their level 4, way more than the rest. You don't see that in the other years. So to me, my question would be at some point, why is that so significant in grade 3 this year that only like 4 or 5 schools had a large number of 4s and then the rest of us were way down? And you don't see that the other years either. So that sticks
I
out
would
to
say
me.
two things. One is that it's the first year our kids take standardized tests, so it probably, and I'm looking at Randy, but probably depends on how much test prep we do. So if we do a lot, if it's the first time our children see a standardized test. I would say that while we encourage test prep to a certain degree because we want children to feel comfortable and familiar, I would say that we don't call test prep teaching. And so for us, I would say that's one possibility. The other possibility is it depends on the program that they use. Some programs, I think, especially very traditional programs, might prepare students initially in a different way, but then over time, once they have the math concepts under their belt, they might be able to take those on in a different way where they have more, they know more strategies, whereas in third grade, it's your first time. So I don't know, and I would defer to Randy.
If I may, there's also, you have to look at, every once in a while, particular communities have a cohort of kids that are just off the chart in particular areas. I can think in my last district of 2 cohorts of children that as we followed them through the years, not looking at the number of 3, 4 combined in the 90s, talking about groups of kids that continually, year after year, we had 75 to 80% of the kids that were the equivalent to the level 4. It was that particular cohort of children. On the
It
flip
wasn't
side,
the superintendent.
he had something to do with it, but he recruited them to come. But on the other hand, there's particular groups of children where you have more students with need, where larger childs that receive AIS services and so on, that you can follow their trend. So what you're looking at there is, as Dr. Kaur indicated, these tests aren't designed to measure student progress longitudinally. But what we want to see comparatively to see gains from year to year for particular groups of children. So that's what our target would be. So there's a number of factors that influence the state.
I guess my point is, it just sticks out. And again, it's not like we're that different than a lot of the other ones in third grade, but I guess maybe it's something to keep an eye on next year.
I would give you another example.
Differential, because it doesn't jive with the other years, and it's not only us that's sticking out as like a group of us versus a group that seems to do really well.
But I will give you an example that last year, the year before, Main Street School did a data analysis where they actually looked at, why did our kids get the scores they got? Was it that they didn't understand the concepts, or was it the language? And what we found was that we used certain language as part of Trailblazers that wasn't the same as what New York State did. And we actually re-gave those questions to the 4th graders, and we made sure they knew the language, and they did better on those questions. So I think there's so many pieces. What we look for is the trends. So if we continue to see that trend, then I would think yes, because we know a lot contributes.
And the other thing is, I asked the question not because I want to get hung up on the numbers, but more that as we build the foundation for our kids, if there's something we can do better as we're building a 3rd grader's foundation, maybe that's where I think the numbers could be useful. Again, as you said, they vary every year.
So I'm just going to keep going. I know I said 57 slides. These are here, and again, you have them in the presentation. But I think I continue to just make my point in terms of where we sit and what those numbers indicate in terms of from one district to another. 8th grade, moving on. So what you see here on this chart is 2008 was the last year that the Math A, algebra was designed in a Math A, Math B sequence. So starting in 2009, you'll see integrated algebra. and you can see our scores. Unlike the 3 to 8 testing, the Regents uses percentages. The Math B, so this stopped, and again, I just keep it here as a point of reference. And I'm going to just clarify that. So the reason that 2009 and 10 are there, I'm just looking at Dr. Mosenthal, is because those students who started in Math A still finished in Math B. So there was some overlap for a brief period.
I'm trying to understand this spreadsheet. Would you mind if I ask a crazy question and go back to just 8th grade math? Okay, so I'm looking at our evaluation. So am I to understand that Pleasantville has 100% of their kids getting 3s and 4s, and that's why they're at the top of the list. We have 94% of our kids getting 3s and 4s. And therefore, 6% of our kids are scoring 1s and 2s of 154 kids. So we're talking about what, 7 kids are causing us to fall to be 9th. So if we were able to get those 7 kids up to level 3, we'd be in first place. Is that how this works?
We're talking.
And what are we doing to do that?
I guess the question would be, I'm probably not going to answer the question would be is, what does it mean to do that? Because, and that was my way I started. The test changes, and that's why the variability changes. So again, I'm going to give you an example. It's an ELA example. Several years ago, our kids didn't do well in poetry. We spent the whole next year. There was a whole poetry piece on the state assessment. We focused on it. We did it. And you know what? We thought we were teaching the skills that the kids would need, and the test changed, and they didn't ask those questions that we ended up teaching. So I think we just want to be careful. I think in any given year, our goal is always to get the kids to the standard. That's a given. But I think we need to be cautious here, because without looking at exactly what that test looked like, and looking at what those questions were, and looking at what the circumstances were, it's not so easy to just say, what are we doing? Our commitment every year with every grade, from our academic intervention program to our classroom instruction, is geared to have every student pass the state assessment. That's what we work for. And in some years, we're clearly more successful than we are in other years, but I think, generally speaking, we do a very good job.
All right, so I'm not the academic person, okay? But if we have the 7 kids in the 8th grade not testing to some level of proficiency, and the teachers in the class know it because they see the test, are we reaching out to the family saying, we need these kids to get some more help?
We don't see the test, so I want to make a point.
Well, I would assume that the grades are relatively similar. The kids who's doing poorly in math is also going to do poorly in the state assessment.
The problem with the New York State assessment now is we do not see what the student got wrong. So it used to be that we could go into the data warehouse, we could click on the question. So I could look up Raina Kaur and I could say, Raina Kaur got these 5 questions wrong on the state assessment. And I could click on that question, I could read the question, they would give me models and samples of similar questions, so that not only could I reteach to that student, but I also then could use modeled problems to reassess them and see if they're now understanding. New York State no longer provides us with that. New York State gives us data, and they give us standards. So again, we could look at those standards, but we have no idea what that student, what that question was.
So we don't even know the students' names who are testing 1 and 2?
Yes, but I don't know what they got wrong.
So to the point that you think you'd have an assessment, and you could do essentially an item analysis, where you could say, out of a group of 120 children, those 7 that didn't score in 3 or 4 are here, and then you can look at their results and be able to say, identify the areas that they were deficient in. That information isn't as readily available as it once was. What is promised, though, going down the road with the Park assessment, which is 2 years away, is that you're going to have more access to be able to disaggregate the data, to be able to look at it through a variety of different lenses. So not only will we be able to see the standard that the children had trouble with, but there's supposed to be subsets of that data that you would then be able to develop specific interventions. So when we look at those let's say hypothetical, 7 students. Those 7 students are identified and they are being served in our AIS programs so that they're getting supplemental math. Those are students that are also probably receiving special ed services in some cases. And then there's some children that may not be in special ed categories. But when we look at that, our teachers will be able to develop targeted interventions specifically tailored to what those children's needs are. There's a piece that's where we're kind of handicapped right now and not understanding and knowing where our kids are truly deficient. You know, a standard is a broad sweeping statement, and it doesn't delineate all the areas in which a child may have gotten problems wrong.
So
I've sidetracked you for a long time.
you're not, and I guess I just want to share what we have and what we do. Because what we get is ultimately, we get a report. And so I print the report on Raina Core, and it tells me by standard, where did Raina fall, where was she deficient on this assessment. So, in a perfect world, a student would be deficient in one area, because then I can provide that intervention. But what we generally see is it doesn't work that way. So, without the more detailed information, it is very hard to know how to target it. What I can see is that a student who got 7 wrong, it's spread out across the standards. So that makes it even more complex.
Raina, what you're saying is that you don't use this data to create an intervention.
Well, exactly, we don't use
On a
this data.
student level, right?
No,
You
not
have-
to create, what we do is first of all, we check our systems though. So what we go to look back and we say, so is this a student who's receiving academic intervention to make sure that we have a child not falling through the cracks? And we look at those standards, we do look to see, did it fall across the assessment or was it one area? We generally see it's across, it's harder to target. So no, we used to go back in, look at the exact questions, and be able to surface exactly what was going on.
Does it provide in summary, like for all Irvington 3rd graders, does it tell you like by, what do you call it, by category?
Standard.
By standard, how we did as in total, so you can see are there standards that the district, that all of our 3rd graders are falling kind of down on, or no?
Yeah, but it's not, and again, we have a very low number of kids tested, so it's generally, when you look at the data, it is very spread out, it is very random. It's very hard to use this data, so which is why I'm saying when we look at this, what we see is that for the most part, so Robin, you brought that one point that I think is, useful for us when we see the differences, but for the most part, we fall within a range. So I'm just going to keep going. So again, the 2012 data for the algebra trig regions, and you can see from the year before, geometry, and I'm going to move to ELA. So again, grades 3 through 8, that darker bar indicates where they changed the test and they made the scoring more rigorous. The other thing is important to know is the difference between a 3 or a 4 can sometimes be literally 2 questions, and a student who would have been a 4 is now a 3. So each year they've also changed their system for assessment and using this, creating what they call the scale score. So it's, again, it's a challenge. Our comparative data. So again, this is grade 3 for ELA, grade 4 for ELA, grade 5.
So in 3rd grade, our kids can read, but they can't do math.
Actually, I thought our kids do well in math too in 3rd grade.
3rd grade was low.
It was what?
Well, low, okay.
I'm sorry, I was being facetious.
All right.
We both have 3rd
I
grade.
guess
We
low,
both have 3rd graders, so yeah, exactly.
low relatively.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the great us Whitney kids that are doing
Exactly. They can both talk, they just don't want to add anything. That's all.
6, 7, and 8.
I just want to say, I think visually we need to remind ourselves of the quantity of districts within the county when we see the rank. So when you see that number, so if you see a number where we're down on the bottom of the visual that we're providing. There are many, many districts below us, and also look at the rank figure that's there. You may see a tie, 5 districts ranked at number 2. So in reality, if we may show up at number 6, but we may have the 3rd best score or whatever in the county. So we need to be mindful of that as well if our minds are starting to allow us to go down that competitive track.
Well, it's also the top schools in English have low grades as well. Everyone's got lower grades in English than in math, everybody.
The ELA assessment, and last year, the ELA assessments were very, very difficult. It was the first year they changed it. This year, the assessments will also reflect the Common Core. And I mean, I think the reality is that no district is so far ahead in implementing the Common Core. It is a huge undertaking. And while we are making tremendous efforts, I would not say to you that we are 100% Common Core aligned. I just don't think anyone can be just yet.
So the scores that we're looking at here from 2012 were pre-Common Core.
Last year, last year's assessment reflected some of the Common
Right.
Core. This year's assessment will reflect the Common Core, and then the year after will actually be a whole new assessment.
So when you think of that dark line that Dr. Core had, you'll see another dark line after this year and another dark line after that. You got to think. So when this is a lens of how our kids did, a snapshot. And Raina will talk about, well, what does this mean to us momentarily? But we need to think that measure, that target has been moving for us, what we say, 3 out of the last 5 years.
Can I ask, I don't know, it's a provocative question. We wanted to get to the top of the list, and I know we're not supposed to want to get there. Yeah.
But there's a but coming, yeah.
Is that about professional development? Is that about more teachers? Is that just the luck of the draw because Irvington has a more diverse population with some cohorts that just simply don't have the means to have a family life that will create that kind of a scoring trajectory? I mean, what does it take to move up to a certain consistently?
Let me make it more provocative. Or is it about better teaching to the test as opposed to teaching?
Yeah. All are on the table.
Right.
Well, and even I like to take that one step further, which is because of all the variations in the state testing, I feel more strongly about that question when you look at the regions, because regions have been around for years and years and years, and my perception of regions has always been, right or wrong, it's not a hard test. And I look at our numbers, and I'm kind of disappointed that, the numbers of people getting 85 to 100 is not overwhelming on our regions. And so regions, to me, even more so than the state test, because of how they keep changing it, I think I then would take his questions and put that overlapping the regions more.
I think I would say 2 things about that, and then I would certainly, welcome Scott to jump in on this. 2 things. Unfortunately, they don't have the comparative data yet. So the comparative data, like I'm showing you for grades 3 through 8, doesn't come out until the spring. So I'm happy to come back in the spring and show you the comparative data because I think it's important. It doesn't mean that we don't want to do better because it's not all about comparison and I don't ever want to shape it that way.
Right.
But the comparative data gives you some insight into the actual assessment. So, in other words, if we compare ourselves to these districts and everybody's working out similarly, well, that tells you something about the assessment. It may also tell you something about the curriculum possibly as well. Whereas if we're standing out and we're not doing it, we're doing 67% above 85 and our neighboring and our like districts are doing 85% at that rate, then I think it raises a different question as well. So, I don't know, Scott.
I agree. That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, last thing I'll say on it, but I just look at the algebra where we had 57% of people who took it got 85 or higher, and that's concerning to me because if only 60% of our kids can get 85 on the algebra regions, then it means to me that not a large percentage of them are going to be very successful when you get to calculus. Like, that's the building block, and it has always been known as one of the easier regions. So, like, I look at that number and think, I wish we could, look at what we could do there.
I think the one piece I want to point out is about who takes the test. So remember that we have 40 or so, 45, maybe 50 middle school kids
So closer to 60. This year's over 60.
take the algebra regions in 8th grade. So when we look at these numbers, we divide out, we take out, for the good and the bad, we surface out the higher achieving.
Oh, you take out the 8th grade?
I'm saying that when you see this cohort, you're seeing our higher level 8th graders and you're seeing the 9th graders, and the kids who took algebra in the 8th grade are now in geometry.
Right, but it all evens out. I mean, to me, it's just a strong foundation in algebra versus, I'm more concerned, again, I'm not trying to get hung up on the numbers, but I'm worried that if 40% of our kids are only getting a 65 to 84 on the algebra regions, then they're not going to be that successful in calculus or trig or geometry.
So you could have written the Common Core. So the heart and soul of the Common Core in mathematics is algebra. And what they've decided, and there's a lot of questions about whether developmentally they're asking kids to do things at lower grades that they can or can't do. I think that remains to be seen. But the whole design behind the Common Core is the introduction of algebra at the earliest grade levels. So I think there is something to what you're saying, and I think they're seeing that for higher level mathematics, we need to be building a stronger foundation earlier on.
And again, I'm just looking at the numbers, and that's kind of what I'm like, that worries me.
And again, I would, want you to invite me back to look at some of the comparative data in the spring when that comes out.
It's a date.
Dr. Porter,
Dr. Cole.
did you actually answer my question?
I think that's your close, I think, the reflection on the way the provisions.
Oh, so my question was like all of the above. Did I say that?
No.
Oh, I mean, I think it's all those things. I think it's everything. I think there are pieces to it. I think it could be test prep, it could be the program, it could be the cohort of students. There's so much variability on it, and that's. So I don't think I can answer.
Is it, or let me ask you,
Is it professional
is it a
development?
worthy goal to try to have all of our students, to have our scores at 90% in the 3 and 4 categories?
Sure.
We're not there in
Absolutely, it's a worthy goal.
And that would be a byproduct of the things that I think that all the elements of instruction, good schooling that you talked about. And when I think we look at what has happened this year, I obviously don't have that frame of reference to make the comparison. But what I see, what I hear from interacting with colleagues, the teachers, there's a tremendous effort that's being led through Raina's office that is focusing on not only what we're doing to align curriculum, tremendous impressive effort as far as professional development and increasing teachers' capacity, increasing their skill set, introducing appropriate resources, realigning curriculum, teachers actually sitting down and working in a clinical setting, working with student work. That work's being carried out through the principals as well. I look at Mr. Sotile sitting there and reflect on what some of his goals are this year, and he smiles. But the idea of how he's going to be leading student teacher group work, utilizing student work samples. There's a different focus. I think that we're going down a path, and I think we're going to naturally see growth. There's going to be transition. It's going to lead us down that path. It's not going to be overnight. As long when we go back to the budget slide that Mr. Grados wanted to see, we look at all those extracurricular things. We can keep all those on the table. If we can have as many kids as possible engaged in as many of those elective extracurricular activities we can, and we keep climbing up that chart, it's something to be proud of. But one thing alone shouldn't be something that we wave our flag at.
I also want us to be careful. It is a moving target. It's a moving target. And so I guess I feel like, is it a worthy goal? It's absolutely a worthy goal. But I think we measure our success of our students and our children in lots of different ways here. And I think it goes back to that slide you referred to. Many, many different ways. This is just one measure. And it's at times a random measure. So I'm just going to go through science. Science, we give a 4th grade science assessment and an 8th grade science assessment. New York State is currently looking to change the model and give an assessment at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but currently we don't see that. Again, the regions data, you have the earth science regions, living environment,
Science, when you have 8th graders taking Earth Science, but then you also have high schoolers taking Earth Science. Do you
They all
combine
take
them?
the regions. These are combined.
It is combined, so it's reflective of,
8th grade is reflective of those 45, how many 8th graders take Earth Science?
Last year, we had 54, 55.
So they take the regions as well. The interesting thing, for the New York State math assessment, even the kids who take the algebra take the math. All students take the math assessments.
But not the science.
Yeah. So even that, so it's hard to do comparison. Living environment, chemistry. Move to social studies. In social studies, at this point, we used to give a 5th grade social studies assessment and an 8th grade assessment. I think the state decided they were going to save some money. They stopped offering that assessment, although there is now a proposal that they're going to now put in as a social studies assessment at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade moving forward. So currently, we have the Regents data.
And I forgot, you're not showing the comparative against the schools on the
It's
Regents.
not available
It's not
for the
available.
Regents. So world languages, you will see another, I believe, Dr. Mosenthal, a cost savings effort on the part of New York State to not offer world language regions?
I'm sorry,
to
what was
what,
that?
say that again?
Cost savings effort for New York State, giving the regions costs a lot of money.
Right.
So as you'll see, French,
Oh, they cut
Spanish,
it.
they cut it. There's no.
There is no more
Last
region.
year, our schools do their own for world language.
Yes.
Yeah, they got rid
We
of.
created our own region-style test.
I don't know if you can answer this question. How many kids take French regions compared to Spanish kids? Like, is it,
You mean kids who take Spanish
Well,
regions?
Spanish versus French.
what did I say?
She's just.
Are you asking how many students take French and how many, the proportion of kids who take Spanish?
Yes.
What do you guess? I mean, I'd say we probably have a class set that would take the French regions, anywhere
Like
between
30 kids
17,
or so?
18, sorry,
Oh, 17, 18,
somewhere
okay.
around that, and then 3 times the amount would be taking the Spanish.
There's a huge difference between those two things.
Between those two,
Exams.
Between the two, between French and Spanish. Such a
we
small
don't give that
population.
exam anymore.
Yeah.
right?
What?
We don't give that exam anymore.
I know.
You mean the
it's
numbers?
just-
Do you mean the numbers of students participating?
No, meaning the scores.
High performing.
High performing, French, 91%, scoring between 85 and 100%, and with Spanish, 72%.
Well, you're going to look at a phenomenon here. And so let's go look at a child that plays a string instrument and see what their mathematics scores may be. You're going to find that through studies that certain children that are inclined in certain areas pursue certain areas of study. So there's people trying to perform studies, for example, that say, well, by learning an instrument, kids do better in school, when in reality, it's the kids that are doing better in school will have a desire to learn an instrument. French may be perceived as a different type of language, so kids that are academically inclined in different ways may pursue a path of French or Latin. So it's more in nature of the subject, the kids that elect to take it, than student performance on the test.
So just a couple of last slides. It's just being able to look at a cohort. So this is just making note on your copy, that last line, the numbers of students taking the test was not changed. So that's the accurate numbers, 154, 153. So this is what you're seeing, is you're seeing a cohort of students who, from 3rd grade, and how they did. And what you're seeing is where those numbers drop is clearly where the state changed the test and made the test. Now, in general, you will see, I mean, county-wide, statewide, middle school performance very often drops from elementary performance. But here you would see, I think it's a direct correlation to them changing the test.
Well, well and good, that they've changed the test, but our scores keep dropping. And to tell you the truth, everything sounds great until we get right here. And you know, math, we're holding our own, the tests have gotten more difficult. ELA, we're getting smacked in the face here, and that doesn't just say it's a hard test. There's something wrong with our program when our kids are dropping 10 points in 2
But they
years.
didn't drop 10 points. It's a completely different test, and regionally, all the 8th grade students regionally dropped significantly.
Oh.
Remember in 2010, we got those numbers?
No,
We went from 96 to suddenly, like, it was, we all came to that meeting just enraged, like, oh, what the hell's happening? Heck is happening.
And that
Yeah.
picks up with these
Yeah.
spreadsheets from that, sorry.
It was that
That's
everybody
okay.
went.
Right,
down
it's the
because
same
of
thing.
it.
I was just showing you over time.
I still don't like 79%.
Just as a,
Nobody does. And you know, really, no one does.
You
I
know-
mean, that's not a number that makes us happy.
but if you go back to that, just as a point, so in case, I know there's a lot of numbers people, the cohort example slide in board docs right now is different in the last line.
Right, I said the number of tests is wrong on yours.
Okay, I'm sorry, I didn't get that, but just if people are looking through board
Right.
docs.
And
it's wrong.
Elaine's gonna update that, so, right, so what you have up here is the correct one.
Right, okay.
Okay, so again, just always like to give history. I think sometimes people forget where we've been. In 2000, I'd just like to share where we were, how many students. We had 87 graduates. So I love that number because it's just hard to, maybe not for you, Mr. Whitty, but it's hard to imagine 87. I mean, that's.
We had 140 in 1981.
So this just shows you the path and the trend of the increase of students, decrease in variation, but certainly very different from the year 2000 or 2001. The number of AP courses. So it's nice to see that we've pretty much since 2005, we're pretty stabilized. We're going up or down 1 or 2, but for the most part, we're pretty consistent in what we're offering.
Which is an impressive number for a school our size.
Yeah, very.
And I also just want to share the AP exam participation.
You know, this is a slide, when I was looking at this, that struck me, is that we've always talked about how many of our kids are utilizing the AP programs, and we've got scheduling issues and kids getting involved, and this really, it grows every year.
But this doesn't reflect, this reflects, one student could potentially be taking 5 classes.
Absolutely,
This
that's what
is
it
not
says, it's
6,
not
Yeah,
an eight
Yeah,
different.
but say,
Exactly.
one student could have been taking 5 in 2011, so. the
But
numbers are
you
growing.
think
Right.
there's,
It's the number of AP exams that
They're expecting
kids
more,
sit.
right.
Right.
Say that again, I'm sorry?
It's the number of AP exams that we administer, basically. So, right, it could be one kid who takes 5, but what you want to see over time is that you want to see that increase.
Well, maybe in the spring, when you show this to us again, you could have that head count number, because that would be.
Number.
Well, that, I mean, that has nothing to do with the spring data, that's our data.
but that's.
So I can certainly
Well,
go
that's
through
the
that.
next
Yes.
time we put on the show.
Yes, I'd be happy to.
Scott, you probably noticed that there out over time, that
Absolutely.
more and more kids are actually taking AP courses as opposed to one kid taking more AP courses?
Yeah, the high flyers are gonna take the 4 or 5, that's consistent going back all the way to 2000. That hasn't changed percentage-wise. What has changed, the number of kids taking our courses is unbelievable.
As sort of one-offs.
And I also have to think, there's a little bit of an enrollment decline as you've seen the numbers increase as well.
Right.
So.
Right.
That's a percentage.
Yeah, so that's
Yeah.
even more impressive.
It's more of an increase.
Okay, again, just some historical data, where we are, how many teams, and our scholar athletes. So, closing thoughts, just some food for thought as we move on. So, what do we use this data for? I think that came up. So, we use the data along with our formative and summative assessment. So, this is only one piece. The data, the assessment we do in the classroom on a daily basis, and sometimes the formative assessment, which means daily, what do I see, what am I seeing kids knowing and able to do, and how do I change my instruction to make sure that students are learning what I want them to learn, versus a summative, which is really that end of unit test. So we definitely use this as a piece of data. We continue to analyze and use the data to guide our knowledge and understanding of how we meet expectations in comparison. So looking at it to see, are we falling within a range of our neighboring districts, or are we an outlier in some way, shape, or form? And then continuing to look longitudinally at our students in the curriculum to guide. to guide us and ensure that we're meeting students' needs. So, and Dr. Harrison referred to it before, sometimes you have a cohort of students and you do see a trend in their scores over time. And that helps us to know, is it our program? Is it a particular group of students? Doesn't mean that we don't need to find ways to bump those students up and to bolster the instruction for them to be more successful. But it gives us a sense of what's at the heart of the data and what's driving, what should be driving our next steps as a school district. So you've asked questions along the way, so if you have any more.
Can I go to Mark? This is for Scott. No pressure. But all of this obviously comes down to a lot is how our kids do as they move on after they leave here. And I'm just wondering, I know a lot of the early acceptances are in. I've heard a lot of scuttlebutt from Westchester. I'm wondering what the overall picture is for Irvington.
So we're pulling that data right now. I've asked Lesser, our chair, to give an update on where we are with the earlies. Anecdotally, I think we've done, as usually, mixed. We've had some great news, and we've had some disappointing news, and that's fairly typical. But I haven't had my chance to look at the whole thing yet.
I'm sorry, what?
I haven't had a chance to look at what the whole thing
Okay,
is
so you
yet.
don't have the data, okay. When you get a chance, I'd be
Yep.
curious to hear.
I'll send an email to.
Yeah, I know Floresdale did incredibly well this year. They had like 7 kids got in early to 10, which is the highest number they've ever had to the time. Like, but all across the board, they did really well. I don't know why, but.
Checks. Legacies.
Possibly. All right, thanks.
Anyone else?
I just want to make an observation, all right, and it dovetails, I was going to make this comment tonight anyway, and just this dovetails very well. So we're on the, and it has to do with people knowing what we're doing for their kids, and people in the district who don't come to the meetings. They always say, how are we doing? And we really don't do a super job, all right? So with the Fields Initiative going on, the East Field, problem, I was shocked at the amount of engineers and architects and department agencies, state people, helicopters, whatever, coming in to analyze our dirt, okay? We spent tens of thousands of dollars and hundreds of man-hours to analyze our dirt, okay? When it comes to our contracts with our employees and our staff, we have 10, 20, 30-page contracts with years of negotiations and hundreds of hours of legal wrangling to focus on their issues. And then when it comes to our kids, you talk to a parent, you say, how's your kid doing? Well, she's like, I don't know. I don't know how to compare it or what to do. And I'm saying to myself, we do a great job looking at the plant facilities, and we do a great job trying to maintain our structure, all right? I don't think we do a very good job, and I'm not pointing at you, Ray, I'm looking at you, but I'm not pointing at you, okay? I don't think we do a very good job explaining to the people in our district what our district really does, what we are doing for the kids. Now, granted, we have 17 different state bureaucrats changing the tests every year, and we don't get a clear picture. But I think we could try to work towards creating some kind of dialogue on a going forward basis that explains to a new resident to the community and an older resident in the community who kind of is not exactly in the center of the school how we're doing and why we're doing it and why we're doing it well. And by doing that, we will constantly qualify what we're doing, and then we will constantly challenge ourselves to do better. And if we could publish that in some fashion in a white paper that is no more than 2 or 3 pages and update it quarterly or semi-annually, it will only benefit our community. This is a great night. I like this. I really enjoy this. It really clarifies what the heck I'm sitting here at 9:30 at night to do, all right? But I think we can do a better job letting the other people who don't come to these meetings know how good we are, because we're pretty damn good.
That rings true. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that just with the difficulty that we've all had in trying to distill the data, putting this out without explanation is just going to cause more. But and I don't know what you folks think who do this, but is there a way of literally presenting a 2-page report card to the community, much like we report on the budget or however else, that distills this in layman's terms, so that, and it could be something that on a year-to-year basis, we compare ourselves,
The way
talk about our
I-
strides, yeah.
You know, at 3 o'clock in the morning when you wake up and think of things that you can't go to sleep, I was also thinking, why don't we ask, send out to the community, what do you want to know about our school? What is it that you don't know? And we're happy to explain it to you. So then, when it comes to budget time, and we have to ask people to go over the cap, there's going to be a reason why they should, because we've explained to them we're doing a great job.
Yeah, this is, it actually ties into, Maria and I are on the curriculum committee this year. And we did have an initial meeting, we were waiting for the goals, but part of what we talked about was that Chris and Raina were gonna put together some forums with the public to kind of better educate them about what's going on, and it kind of ties back to your point. So now that, I know we just got the goals tonight, but now that we have the goals, hopefully we can maybe jumpstart that and get some forums, and then maybe that would address some of what Jim's saying as well.
That's awesome.
By communicating with these, specific areas that you have so much knowledge, and some people really would love to be part of that too.
People need to listen.
And by the way, we didn't hire a helicopter to go look at our thing.
That accounts for the $700,000.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I guess we'll move on. I know the community, we've scheduled this as a work session as opposed to a public meeting, so that's why we have community comment at the back end. So if there's anyone in the audience who wants to comment on items that appear on the agenda, please do so. There's not too many folks here, but we'll still try to hold you to a reasonable 3-minute period of time. Maybe you could just please say your name for antiquity.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Seth Oster. I have a 4th grader at Main Street and a kindergartner at Dow's Lane. I had 2 issues that I would like to ask Dr. Harrison about. If it's okay, I'll just tell you what they both are, and you can answer them in whatever order you would like. One takes us back to the more unfortunate circumstances of the issue in Connecticut that you referenced at the beginning. And I first want to say I appreciate all the very hard and intense work that you all must have been doing since that unfolded. And I know it's very difficult to manage a situation like that under any circumstances. So my questions are more just informative for me. But I'd be curious about a few things. One is just what the general protocols are that are in place. I mean, you referenced a number of things that have happened. They all sound like a lot has been done in that intervening period. But I'd just be curious, when you learn that an incident like that is taking place, just what protocols kick in immediately. You referenced working closely with the mayor and the police department, and I'd be curious to know just what the police department's reaction was in the moments leading from development of it, situation to maybe dismissal. And my last question regarding that is, do all the school doors for classrooms in all the schools lock? Which we now know was both an issue that was extremely positive in terms of protecting many children in Connecticut, and in one case, at least that I know of, proved problematic in that situation. And the other question I have relates to the issue of the budget. I'd be curious to know if we have any data about how other school districts are faring in Westchester with regard to shortfalls in the budget. And a number of you have referenced how critically important it is to educate and bring into the conversation parents around the district. And I would just, again, be curious to understand what you're seeking from them. Is it just further information and awareness, or is it some sort of reaction and feedback to you? So thank you very much for all your work on these long meetings.
I guess if it's okay, I'll answer the second one. I think that with respect to the budget and the clarity, over the years in Irvington, the communication, at least hearing from the community, has always been an issue about really understanding what's happening, particularly with the budget as tax increases. There's a period in Irvington before I was here, I guess before you lived here as well, that taxes went up exponentially And there was a real desire from the community to really understand what was happening. And I think that prior administration did not do a really good job. People understood what the bottom line number was, but nobody really understood how it got there. It seemed like a bit of hocus pocus. Over the prior 3 years, well, I don't know, so people have said that. I mean, and so what we've done is really made the process one of just complete open kimono. Here's all the data, here's where the numbers are. Please look at it, help us out. We had the budget task force do reviews for years, looking at various ways of decreasing cost line items in the budget. But going to your ultimate question, what are we expecting from the community? I think now, unless you're very new to the community and didn't see the budget presentation of the last 2 years, I think we're to the point that there isn't fluff in the budget to cut. We're to the point that we're sort of striking into bone no matter where we cut. And so what we're really looking to the community for is, what do we want our district to look like? And so, you know, are you okay not having, or is the majority of the community okay not having world languages? Is the majority of the community okay with getting rid of sports? And these are ways that we're going to get that $1.7 million number down. I think that's what we're looking at from the community, is what's important.
I suppose to enrich that, there's, I think, it's premature to be able to predict, I think, where our other Westchester counterparts are going to shake out. I can tell you from our conversations, and probably be a good segue into reflecting on Friday, that I was meeting with the majority of superintendents from Westchester, a group from Long Island, a group from Rockland, some from Putnam, that were meeting with all our legislators and campaigning and giving them resources to serve as advocates for public schools. And we were there meeting when this news broke regarding the tragedy in Connecticut. So you know, there's tremendous effort underway. A newfound consortium of school superintendents, school districts that represent approximately 199 school districts in the state. So you're looking at almost a third of the districts are on the same platform, looking for the same types of relief, proposing opportunities for our legislators to grasp on to some initiative that may provide mandate relief, trying to look for some reform in the pension area, modeling some efforts after other states such as New Jersey. So within the context of those conversations, you sit there and you listen to my colleagues explain what their impacts are. And when I was sitting with our legislators, I talked about that 1.7 figure. I talked about how we got there using that same data that we shared tonight. And I listened to my colleagues do that. You see a mixed bag. There's a lot of districts that aren't having as focused of a dialogue as we are at this point. But I think you're definitely going to see a number of districts that are going to try to go over cap. One of the issues with that is that you're looking at a supermajority as opposed to a general majority. So that makes a lot of folks hesitant. When we're talking about where other folks fall, I can't represent what dollar amount where their budgets are, but what I can tell you is that I've seen some data that would project that by this time next year, there could be potentially 20 to 30 school districts in the state of New York that would be insolvent based upon cap projections and where they would be if they remained within cap. So I think that brings us back to some of Mr. Grados' commentary with respect to the efforts in the past that contain taxes and lowered the tax base, which now is, shall we say, I don't want to say penalty, but I think you know what I mean, that the base is lower to grow from. In reality, there's some cases where I'm sure there's fiscal mismanagement, but it's that holding back of the base for a number of years. Now all their costs are far exceeding them. Districts, some not too far away from here, where they're not sure how they're going to make payroll in a couple months. To transition to your concerns or questions with respect to Friday, we also have to look at how that unfolded within the time frame that is our school day. I can remember getting back midday from that session down at the Doubletree with all the different legislators, and one of the first conversations I had was with Mr. Grados about what was going on in the community. The conversation then grew to Mayor Smith and the Chief of Police. At that point, you have to remember that the official reports was that there was a shooting, adult on adult, 2 people. It didn't grow until we were in mid-afternoon to start to understand the impact of this being a mass shooting with student and staff victims. But we were in close contact with them. Police immediately put additional patrols on the road. Some folks questioned, well, why didn't we see a police car sitting in front of a school? There was no local threat that was communicated. Guidance that was coming out of law enforcement led to, for everybody, intelligence agency to be a more isolated incident. But because you did not see a black and white and green Irvington police car sitting in front of the school, doesn't mean that there wasn't police attention at this school.
And just to also say that the schools did go on lockdown. I'll speak directly about Dow's Lane and Main Street. At both dismissals, and I can say this because I was standing in front of those schools for both dismissals, there was police presence at both dismissals when the children were exiting the schools and getting on the bus and being picked up by the police.
I just caution to use the term lockdown. If you picture lockdown in the context of what we're thinking in Connecticut being code red, you're looking at code yellow, where we change protocols, sign in, sign out. And we've learned from those experiences. We've modified things. Randy implemented new protocols today based upon experiences Friday and yesterday. So it's a learning curve. We have specific protocols in place teachers to be able to secure students in place, as you have learned about from the tragedy in Connecticut. We are in the process of identifying any issues where a teacher didn't have a key or lost the key, or felt you have a sticky lock. And those things are all being addressed immediately. So we don't foresee that. The teacher's ability to lock the classroom down, secure children being a concern at all in the future.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work.
Thank you.
Any other comments from the community? Hearing none, the next meeting of our board will be Tuesday, January 8th at 7:30, right here. I'd like to wish everybody a belated happy holidays, an upcoming Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year to us all. Thank you. May I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion made.
All those in favor? Aye. Good night. Thank you.